Hello and welcome to the Sky Blue Times YouTube channel. Today I wanted to go a little bit deeper into the fitness of our central defenders and the group of defenders that we do have going into the new season. Some of the concerns that people have raised, I've seen discussions online about how reliable some of these players are, and just dive into the kind of numbers behind it, my thoughts on those players and the actual size of that group compared to what we were dealing with heading into the 23-24 season. 24-25 season, versus what we're going to go into this new season with after the transfers that we've made in the January window and in the summer. Now, I'll start with just one thing, and it's a mention on Kyle Walker specifically. Now he is an outlier in this regard in terms of his availability. He's always there to be selected and picks up a hell of a lot of minutes across his entire career. I believe in the last 10 years he's missed about 22 games through injury, which is really outstanding compared to other players within the Premier League and within the top leagues in Europe, and that is the kind of model you're looking for when it comes to defenders for Manchester City. For Pep Guardiola, these are players that are the fabric of the team. They are very much structural players, so when these guys can't be in the team week in, week out, that's a big problem. You think of what John Stones could have been if he had the fitness of somebody that could play 30 plus 90s per season. Would be perceived as an even better player than he is. Even though the talent is there, you combine that availability and it really does go to another level. For Walker, it's an outstanding quality. It's something you expect very much from fullbacks, and that's why it's very encouraging that Aït-Nouri, for example, hasn't been injured since 2021. You look at the way that Nico O'Reilly has handled stepping into the men's game very well. Matheus Nunes, his injury record, very good. Even Josko Vardy as well, very good injury record. So these are things you need specifically for fullbacks, and that'll be something they'll bear in mind when they're looking at the right back, whether it's this summer, which seems unlikely given the lack of space and to move on players to open up a non-homegrown spot, but definitely when it comes to whether it's January and they take a risk there, or when it comes to the summer and they have a player in mind to be that long-term success for Walker. But this still carries across to your defenders. The players that played the most last season as a centre-back, that played the most in the season before that as well, ends up being the players that consistently stay fit. So when John Stones was incredible during the treble season, he wasn't able to sustain that fitness over the last two seasons, and that would have made all the difference having him as a regular. But if you don't have that availability, then it's very hard to really have that much of an impact, despite having all the talent that you do. Now, I mentioned when it comes to last season, you can see here total games missed through injury. Manchester City central defenders: Stones, Diaz, Akanji, Ake. Big increase relative to what we're used to seeing from these players. So as much as people do play on Nathan Ake being injury prone, you can see from here he's got a spike as high as John Stones, but the level throughout his career is not really that bad from Nathan Ake. Ruben Diaz spike up from what he's used to, the same with Manuel Akanji across when they've been playing for Manchester City specifically. You can see that across all competitions. Last season, Guardiola made a point where he was saying that players pass from the Masters table to playing games in high competitions. Normally after the Masters table, you have 3 days for training in 1 week. After that, then you start to play. Now they have to play right away. And that gave them a lot of problems, where you had players picking up injuries, the central defenders. They can't have the recovery sessions and the training sessions to work their way in. They were immediately thrown into 90 minutes, and then guess what? They need to play 90 minutes again because there's no defender to be able to provide them the rest. So Nathan Ake comes back from injury, doesn't have the time to train, thrown straight in, plays that 90 minutes, comes off, and then the next game he has to play because John Stones is injured and Ruben Diaz is injured, and it's only him and Akanji there. So you can see how that kind of snowballs across the season. When we get to the squad at the end, this becomes more of a more relevant point, as the volume of defenders that we have is much bigger than what we had going into the previous season. It's 9 now versus 7 last season. So plenty more options to pick from, and certainly when it comes to central defenders, there's a lot more options of players that are fit and available, as we'll get onto a little bit later. And then the last couple of things I wanted to mention to you is when it comes to Manchester City centre-backs, the number of sprints, high-speed runs, and the general kind of movement that they have to do to always be available on the ball, whether it's the build-up, whether it's just being pressed all the time, and so on top of all the defensive work, is a very high load for them to be able to handle throughout games and throughout the season. So when you're talking about defenders that are coming back from injury and you're thrown straight into that environment without the recovery sessions, without the training sessions with the team and so on, and the break between the 90 minutes, as I mentioned already in this video, without having that, when the load is so high physically with the athleticism, the sprints, etc., it's a very hard environment for that defender to come back, ease through his injury, recover, and get his way back into the team, settled and be injury free and not have to deal with any kind of recurring injuries, niggles, etc. And just to illustrate this, Ruben Dias last season, I know he got a lot of criticism for his performances, and there's a lot that is really quite fair with the mistakes that he made last season. But I was looking at Skill Corner did an article where they were talking about different things with defenders, and I was looking at another site that was doing grading central defenders on their fewest positional errors, and only Gabriel ranked higher than Ruben Dias for the fewest positional errors, which I'll include a link to the article down below in the description. And then Dias led all central defenders for high-speed runs and for high-speed running distance in the Premier League last season. So that tells you a lot about the role Ruben Dias has to do as a centre-back, the amount of running he has to do. And when you're talking about players like Kanji, Ake, Stones trying to work their way back into fitness, they're not coming into a very low demand environment when it comes to all these different things with the high speed runs. They're thrown straight back in without the recovery sessions, without the time to rest in between these 9 minutes. It's not a surprise that you see these injuries spike. But when we're looking back over the last 4 seasons I've got here on this graphic, last season is an outlier compared to all of these players' previous history in those last 4 years playing for City across all competitions. Now, if I just move over to this one here, this is Manchester City, just defenders in general, total 90s played, all comps across the last 3 seasons. I've included Aït-Nouri just to give you a bit of perspective now. He worked his way into being a regular in the team by the 23-24 season, and he's playing 29.5, 90s, 37.6. So this is somebody, once he is a regular starter, has shown he's capable of handling the number of minutes, and he would only increase when he plays at City because the volume would increase of the games, because you're adding all the cup games, you're adding the Champions League, whereas at Wolves you just got the Premier League and then the odd couple of cup games before they do get knocked out. And they usually haven't had, at least in the last few seasons, not had that kind of deep cup run to extend that. And then when you're looking at other players, so Josko Vardiol here, 22-23 is from he's a Leipzig days, so that's 33.4, 38.2, 50.1. That 50 really is built on the injuries that we've just spoken about from last season of all the other central defenders that's demanded Josko to play all games at left back virtually without any rest, and then having to play as a centre back in games he could have been rested on top of that, and then eventually towards the end of the season he became that first choice central defender, left centre back. So that number is only going to decrease next season once we have the options we've got in. The fact that he's not going to be asked to play left back and left centre back, that we do have options to rotate him with, whether it is Nathan Ake, but we also have other players that can play as a left centre back as well. And he's not being used as a left back primarily because that's taken up by Aït-Nouri. That's the backup roles taken up by Nico O'Reilly. So that should only reduce. But then when we're talking about players like Ruben Dias, I've seen people mentioned him being injury prone, but the last 3 seasons, 38.5, 41.4, 35.8. That doesn't look like last season. He showed you he was very injury prone as across his career, rather so that was a troubling season for all these defenders last season, rather than across their career. Kanji 42.4, 42, 32. So that's still good healthy numbers there across those last 3 seasons. The two is Nathan Ake and John Stones, whereas when you're comparing the two, lost those last 2 seasons. So outstanding for John Stones relative to his career level fitness he's shown at City, 29.9, but that's not been the case across the last 3 seasons as a whole, with 19 there and then 12.6 last season, whereas Nathan Ake, that's 2 seasons there, 32.1, 32 there, back to back, and then he dealt with those issues with his injury, I believe it with his foot last season. And he had a season, I believe it was 21-22 with a hamstring injury, if I remember correctly. But they were 2 distinct bad injuries rather than it being somebody that was consistently picking up injuries all the way throughout the season. And again, this is still a good amount of minutes for him to play. You want to have the volume of defenders that can play that 30 kind of 90 plus, 30 plus 90s across the season, across all competitions. Having enough of those players, you're able to rotate them well enough that you reduce any kind of outliers like this with Josko Vardio across the season. But we've got more than enough defenders in that group that I think we can trust their availability. And even within Nathan Ake, we're talking about a guy that's not going to be the first choice left centre-back, that's not going to have to play left-back with all the kind of demands of pressing really high up the pitch and covering that ground and getting up and down the touchline. So he doesn't have that demand. Josko's also going to benefit from not having that demand when he moves into play just as the central defender. So I wouldn't be too concerned when it comes to Nathan Ake in that regard. Kusanov can absolutely fill in as a left centre-back. Ruben Diaz can absolutely fill in as a left centre-back. So you definitely have on Akanji, actually, I didn't mention him. So you definitely have options of players, and even John Stones can do a job there. You do have options of players that can play there in those kind of rotation minutes, really. Even if you go into next season and Nathan Ake picks up an injury, well, that would be a hammer blow to his career the following season. But it's not like we're looking around at the other central defenders and having nobody there. And as we discussed earlier in the video, last season was an outlier for injuries for specifically central defenders, and that only compounded across the season and become much worse than really the problem was, as we've discussed. So yeah, I really wouldn't be too concerned when you're looking at that group in particular. If we look at this one here, this is total games missed by injuries by Manchester City defenders at 17-18. Now, these minutes are going to be, I believe Akanji included these. Some of these are from his Dortmund days. Ruben Diaz, some of these are from him with Benfica. John Stones' entire City career. And then Nathan Ake as well, just from some earlier seasons with, I believe it was Bournemouth. Some of these would be from since him and Ruben did join in the 2021 season. But as you can see here with Nathan Ake, as I mentioned, two distinct major issues. Hamstring, I think 2021, and then it's to do with his foot last season. But apart from that, these are all normal levels of injuries you'd expect for players to pick up. Still quite reasonable. John Stones stands out as being a bit of an outlier here because you just don't have those seasons where you have the drop. Even in the treble season, still missed plenty of games. That 21-22 season where City were outstanding is one that he didn't have a game missed for injury that was registered when I was looking at these on Transfermarkt. Akanji, I don't think has shown anything to be too concerned about across that, probably a little more so than Ake if you're extending it across the career, as I've shown you here. Ruben Diaz, again, not something to be majorly concerned about either. It's just when you're looking at specifically last season and using that as your kind of barometer to judge how injury prone our players are over their entire career, it doesn't stack up when you actually look at all the numbers, in my opinion, as you're seeing on this graphic here. And yeah, I think when we're going into that next season, I don't think the concerns need to be as high because we have increased the volume of defenders. We've changed the way the makeup is, so you've not got defenders like Akanji and Ake that are covering left back and left centre back, right back and right centre back. You have got players, whether they're not ideal at right back with Matheus Nunes and Rico Lewis, you've got players that can definitely play as a right back in certain games, so that reduces the load for whoever's taking on the right back minutes. As I mentioned earlier in the video about Eitan Nori and Nico O'Reilly, they're taking the left back minutes between the two of them, so you're reducing that minute load. So then you're just moving all of these players into just worrying about central defender minutes. And if we're doing a kind of 60 game season, which is very likely next season, that's 5,400 minutes for each position. So for the left centre back, 5,400 minutes. For the right centre back, 5,400 minutes across an entire season. Well, Ruben Diaz should absolutely be looking at getting around 3,000 minutes. Josko Vardio should absolutely be looking to get around 3,000 minutes. So then, and if not more for the two of them. So then you're looking at 2,400 minutes for Manuel Akanji if he stays, John Stones, Nathan Ake, Kusanov. So when you're looking at the actual minutes and the way they kind of stack up, I think we've got more than enough players to be able to handle that load as central defenders. And as I've not got here on Total Games Missed some of the other players, but Kusanov has not had an injury across his entire senior career. Vitor Hayes, if he did stay, then he would have been somebody that only had a short few games missed when he had a muscle injury at Palmeiras, but he's not going to be here. Aitanori, as I mentioned earlier in the video, has not missed a game through injury since 2021. Don't believe Nico Riley's picked up any injuries across his short and early career in the game. As I mentioned, Mateus Nunes has a very good injury record. Rico Lewis, a very, very good injury record. He might have had non-injuries, if not very, very few. So that kind of whole group is filled up by a lot of players that across their career shouldn't give you too much concern about them having injuries. Really, it's John Stones, and he's somebody that is going to be looking, if he stays, to be that fifth centre-back that can fill in across roles. You'd have to be expecting significant outlier kind of injuries from other players to then shift him into a role where he's demanded to play like 3,000 minutes, and he wouldn't be capable of that. But as I mentioned with Kusanov, you have somebody there that can absolutely meet the demands of the Premier League physically. That's not going to, or at least what's shown across his career, not going to be picking up injuries, and he's still going to be behind somebody like Ruben Diaz and the likes of Josko Vardio as that kind of first choice starting centre-back pairing. And that's not a pairing of two players that have a proven record of being injury prone either. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That brings me to the squad, just to remind you all of what we were going into last season with. And you look here, you've got Kyle Walker 34, and obviously we saw what happened last season and that kind of physical drop off. And then your backup is Rico Lewis, who is suited to a range of games, but not to all games. And somebody that had to get thrown into that. And this important point to remember is that last season there was a point where Pep was fuming because his captain Kyle Walker wasn't fit, and Rico Lewis was having to play games week in, week out. So he's going from a player that in the 23-24 season was kind of eased into minutes and picked up more and more, to then suddenly having to play 90 minutes, and not have any rest. And Guardiola didn't have a choice about what was the best fit of game for Rico Lewis to play. He just had to play because he didn't have the options. So that was a big issue over at right back, managing that area. Josko Vardio had to play pretty much every game with the injuries that Nathan Ake had. That meant you didn't have somebody that was a left-footed playing as your left centre-back. So that gave him issues in the build-up. And just on that left-hand side, you've got one player. And then Rico Lewis is having to come over and play left-back some games when Kyle Walker is back. So, yeah, lots of issues there. John Stones injury throughout the season. And then you're really looking at, okay, I've got Rico Lewis, Ruben Diaz, Manuel Akanji and Josko Vardio. And that's kind of what I've got for most of the season. I had good periods where Nathan Ake reappeared. Never really had John Stones around. When Walker was around, he didn't look like it was him playing at his best on the pitch. So that whole group of defenders, not the highest quality, not players that are focused, not players that are their sharpest, and not players that are able to be rotated very well. You compare that to this season, just before we wrap up on the video, you've got what could be a pairing of Mateus Nunes and Rico Lewis. If Manuel Akanji's still around, then that's three different players that plays that right back. You've got Ruben Diaz and Kusanov as the right centre back. You've got Josko Vardio and Nathan Ake, as I mentioned earlier in the video, exclusively there to play as a left centre back. Aitanori and Nico Riley just there to play as the left back between the two of them. And John Stones, should he not depart, which I've got up here to be confirmed at the moment, as a fifth choice. So you compare that group of defenders over to what I just discussed about entering the 24-25 season. You've got much more quality within that group. You've got players that are more suited to playing out wide, getting up and down the touchline as fullbacks, that aren't going to be as prone to picking up injuries and handling that demand of being a fullback. You've got many more defenders that are only playing as central defenders, and then your first choice pairing of Ruben Diaz and Josko Vardio are not players that can't handle the amount of minutes, and are definitely at the quality level that you would want. So you're not making any sacrifices in that regard. And then you've got the depth and the option in somebody that's left-footed in Nathan Ake, in right-footed in Kusanov, and the athleticism that he brings, And then right below that, you've got John Stones as your 5th choice. Should Akanji stay around, you've got somebody as well that can play at right back for different games and can fill in at right centre back. So I wouldn't be concerned about injuries. I wouldn't be concerned about rotation. My main kind of focus for the back line, if I'm somebody trying to judge City next season, is how well does Aït-Nouri adapt as a left back? How well does Memphis Nunes adapt as a right back for everything we need off the ball and on the ball? And how well does this group as a 4 have that chemistry together? Do they press very well? Are they in line? Do they play offside traps? How are they defending in the box as a 4? How do they hand away with duels and long balls, etc.? That should be where the focus is at, not whether we have the quality of defenders, not whether we have the volume of defenders, not whether we would deal with injuries like last season. It's about how well this group, this back 4, works together on the pitch, and that's very much going to be the story of next season for Man City. It's not about how many goals they'll score. As you can see here, we've got more than enough players that will score plenty of goals next season. There's more than enough movement ahead of the ball to be able to create plenty of chances. Different players that can provide all these different types of passes. We've got the backup to Haaland, we've got the backup to Rodri, etc. We've got all those options. And when you look around the league and people are talking about Liverpool, like, City are going to have no problem scoring goals. Liverpool are going to have no problem scoring goals as well, whether they get Isak or not. But what's going to decide the title for Manchester City is going to be how well they defend off the ball, how well that defensive unit comes together, both as a back 4 and then the whole team itself. That's what's going to define Manchester City. But when we're talking about the problems of last season, not being well prepared to rotate players and handle injuries and get away from being so brittle when something goes wrong for 1 or 2 players that pick up a bad injury, we're better prepared for that absolutely for next season. It comes down to how well the team will function together out of possession, how well they will defend as a unit, and that will be the kind of deciding factor of City winning the title next season or not. But yeah, that's pretty much the video. Just my kind of general thoughts on all the defenders, and then a few things towards the end about what I'm thinking about next season and where the problems really kind of lie for us. If there's anything you're confused about that you wanted me to cover, anything you had questions on, if there's a topic that you want me to do in a future video, all of that, let me know down below in the comments, and I'll jump in and reply to you. Please make sure you like the video to support the channel, subscribe so you don't miss out on the next video, and we'll be back with plenty more content next week.